waters. So let's look at what the global media is discussing today. We start with the front page of the I paper in the UK. It covers the Conservative leadership battle, and it says that 20 MPs would defy frontrunner Boris Johnson and block a no-deal Brexit should he try to push it through Parliament. The Washington Post looks at the steps social media companies are taking to tackle misinformation during those democratic debates that have been going on television. The first debate took place, as we mentioned, on Wednesday. Companies have taken additional measures after analysis showed the debates were key for the spread of disinformation in 2016. The Times is reporting scientists predicts the end of cervical cancer in the UK due to the success of the HPV vaccine. Rates of the cancer-causing viruses have fallen by 86% among young women since school vaccination programmes were introduced in 2008. Pink News reports Prince William has said he would be fine if any of his children were gay, though he did acknowledge that he is concerned about the pressures they may face as a consequence. He made the comments during a visit to a homeless LGBT charity. And then The Guardian has this report on the rise of extreme flat share ads with bizarre stipulations. For renters, they include restrictions on who can move in based on star signs and time limits on electric use and showers. The article blames the increase in the number of people who rent. Right, let's get stuck in. Oliver Cornock is back, as promised, Editor-in-Chief of Oxford Business Group. I'm sure you predicted we'd be talking about this morning when you thought about what might be in the newspapers. And sure enough, the Eye looks at the opposition to Boris Johnson.
Indeed it does. And of course, the Tory party, the Conservative party, the ruling party here in the UK is in the middle of this leadership tussle between two candidates. Boris Johnson, a very florid candidate, and Jeremy Hunt, a rather less florid candidate. This has come back. I think Mr Johnson's campaign will be very happy it's back to politics rather than his personal life, something he's very keen to keep separate. And this is basically back to Brexit, Sally, as you said, difficult to avoid at the moment. And it is the dominant factor, of course, in this leadership race. Unfortunately, it's dominating and squeezing out any other sort of policy discussion, which I think is a bad thing. However, the only two constituencies that matter for Mr Johnson are his parliamentary party backing and his local associations within the UK. And the important thing is those local associations are very committed to Brexit. And so his hardline stance on Brexit very much speaks to that. But that's, of course, at odds with the parliamentary backing. So he's got a real tussle on his hands. And this is what this story's about. His commitment to getting out on the 31st of October has been really very implacable. He's sort of softened it, according to Twitter, overnight, which plays to this, that actually Parliament and his own party would block no deal. But, of course, how do you negotiate without a no deal, he'd say, on the table? Yeah,
I mean, this article looks at the divide, as it were. It's got Rory Stewart, the International Development Secretary, who was saying, you know, I definitely vote against a Conservative government to stop a no-deal Brexit. And then you've got the former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, within the same party saying, you know, we could just bust out. We could just force our way out at the end of October, no matter what, and Parliament couldn't necessarily prevent that from happening. And it just displays the extreme opinion within the Conservative Party, which has been the big issue right from the very get-go.
Absolutely. And, of course, the mathematics in the Conservative Party, let alone Parliament, do seem to mitigate against that. So it's really hard to see a way forward here, Sally.
Do you think he'll be our next Prime Minister, though, despite all of that, Boris Johnson? What do you think the outcome of this leadership race will be? Well,
the optics at the moment would suggest yes. However, the last few Conservative races have not seen the front-runner win.
So, you're on the fence. On the television. I'll ask you in the green room afterwards. All right, let's look at the Washington Post. And this is really interesting. It's a quite in-depth feature which looks at the management of information as we begin the race for the presidential race, which obviously takes place in 2020. We had the first of two televised debates late yesterday in Miami, and it's looking at what social media companies are doing to get ready for this.
Absolutely. And, of course, the fallout from the election in 2016, where there were so many accusations that social media had been hijacked by bots, by Russia, influence, is still being played out in America. It's still a dominant story in a lot of the, certainly the middle to left left-leaning press. So this is very important. Social media companies putting out their stand, if you like, what they call election integrity strategies, how they can try and counter these deep fakes within them. They call them these technological bots and things that start to generate fake news. Of course, certain irony, of course, that Donald Trump, a huge user of social media, plays both the victim and the victor here, using social media. Step back, and of course, this is against a backdrop of the US government tussling at the moment over huge dominance, these dominant social media companies, Google, Twitter, Facebook.
If, for example, the 2020 presidential election is mired again by the concern that people were manipulated before they went to the polls, these big companies would struggle in many ways to not, to fend off the argument that they need to be regulated, they need to be policed by independent bodies, wouldn't they, surely?
Absolutely.
Because between that 2016 presidential race and this one coming up next year, there's been many other elections around the world, and it's cropping up everywhere. Misinformation, how social media is used to try and sway people's votes with information that's actually incorrect.
And I guess this is what these companies are trying to do. They were caught on the back foot in 2016. They cannot be seen on the back foot in 2020.
The Times has on its front page scientists predicting an end of cervical cancer fight. This is due to this vaccine. We've already mentioned it on the programme, the HPV vaccine, and the programme that was started here in the UK. Women aged 15 to 19 have been vaccinated against the various viruses in school since 2008. It's amazing, really, isn't it, the response this has had?
An amazing figure, and of course things like people going for regular smear tests, regular monitoring of these sort of personal elements of one's body are one of the key factors in tackling early onset cancer, whatever it may be. And I think this is just such a wonderfully sort of public health story. A drop of 83% in the HPV virus, this precancerous virus that can lead to various forms of cervical cancer. An amazing story. And of course now they're talking about boys being vaccinated as well, because of course there's a sexual transmission element as well here. Really important debate. I just hope that this debate, this model of public health is rolled out into other areas, sort of bowel cancer.
I mean, I remember when the vaccination programme was happening in 2008. It was really controversial at the time because many were saying, actually, I don't want my daughter to have this vaccination in school. We want to have a choice on this, etc. And there's this whole issue of vaccination, whatever it might be, and how people are opting out.
But this is such a good example of the positive bets. They were talking about elimination in a relatively short space of time.
Now, Pink News, which we don't feature regularly, but today is looking at Prince William yesterday at this LGBT homeless charity, where he was, asked some very frank questions, and he gave a very honest response about how would he feel if his children were to say to him that they believe they're homosexual, that's their sexuality. Yeah.
I thought this was a really interesting one. I mean, his response was that, of course, he'd be concerned, but that would be the response of every parent. And I thought that was very telling in itself, against the backdrop, of course, of being in a homeless charity, this amazing charity, the Albert Kennedy Trust, that looks after young people who have often been chucked out of their homes for coming out as LGBT. I think this is really interesting. I thought it was a very powerful interview. It played very well in the current backdrop in Pride Month in London, but it also spoke very much about the Commonwealth, actually, his role as the future king. The Commonwealth is dominated by countries that have particularly restrictive, if not very damning, laws against gay people. So I thought it was very one. It was quite a sensitive one. And he spoke, of course, about the pressure on his own child, if they were to be gay, what that would mean as a royal. And I thought that was very interesting as well. So in some ways, come along a long way, but there's still a long way to go. And I think that was the message.
Let's now finally look at The Guardian, which is really interesting, this story about flat share ads, how extreme they are becoming, because this is generation rent, young people who just can't afford to get on the property ladder in the UK. And the ads they're putting out to find people to share with them is quite funny, isn't it?
And it's a captive market for these landlords, is the unfortunate thing. And of course, because of that, these landlords can stipulate these really random things. I mean, they're talking about having sensors to know how long someone's hair tongs have been on, and it's sort of exclusively wanting Scorpios and signs saying no Capricorns. I mean, it is really odd.
They even stipulate how many visitors you're allowed a month, in some cases.
And have to give 2 weeks' notice. I mean, actually, it's a really interesting one. I think step back, and it just feels as though, whilst on so many levels we've come quite a long way in being very liberal, there are certain things that, this is very prescriptive. I don't like this at all.
I know. No Capricorns, apparently. What's wrong with Capricorns? I don't know my star signs very well, but anyway, that's apparently on one of these flat share ads. That is not allowed. Thank you, Oliver, for being on the briefing this morning. And thank you too for watching the programme. Whatever you're up to today, I hope you have a good day. We've been having a good conversation as well on social media today about fast fashion. Many of you have been in touch with your thoughts on that. We've heard from